Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is our third discussion on Jason Littlefield's book, Empowered Humanity Theory. And we are going to be discussing part three of the book. So I just want to recap for everybody where we've been so far. So Diana started us off with part one, a basis for empowered humanity theory. This is the introduction, right, to EHT. We had some really great discussion around that. So I hope you've listened in. If not, go back and listen. It was really great. And then in part two, Wink took the lead. We were talking about the essential attitudes, and those are developing a values-centered identity, cultivating a dignity lens, and prioritizing a compassionate, inquisitive mindset. Again, really great conversation. And Wink actually had us go through an exercise
Mm,
that is in the book. And so I think that's really helpful for people to see in practice what's happening, right? How to put these ideas that we're talking about and learning about into practice. And then that brings us right to part three. Part three is the three pathways of practice. This is a chapter filled with all kinds of examples of ways that we can put what EHT is into practice in our daily lives in order to cultivate these ideas of a dignity lens in the work that we do, the how we interact with people, how we view society, how we take in information and process it and respond to it. So the three pathways of practice in part three are building awareness and equanimity. I'll just describe it briefly. It's engaging in practices such as mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and journaling to regulate emotions, reduce stress and anxiety, increase resilience, and improve relationships. That sounds wonderful. I think that's great. The second pathway of practice in part three is building kindness and compassion for self and others. So this is basically using self-compassion techniques, loving kindness meditation or metta meditation you might be familiar with, gratitude journaling. So not just journaling about your day necessarily, but focusing on gratitude and then just acts of kindness. What are the things we can do in our lives that are coming from a place of kindness that we can extend out to others? And then the third pathway of practice is celebrating common humanity and breaking walls of indignity. And this is about seeking opportunities to find commonalities with others, fostering empathy and compassion, celebrating diversity, challenging discrimination and prejudice, and engaging in acts of kindness. So you can see that, like acts of kindness, that's something that it's repeating again. And it's coming into this third way, this third pathway of practice as well. And with the emotion or the empowered humanity theory, I got it confused with because I was going to say social emotional learning at this around the same time. EHT is a framework that was built out of or designed to cultivate empowerment and social cooperation. And it was Jason's response to what was happening in the social emotional learning world, right? As a as an educator, right, as a teacher in a school district that was focused. His job was on social emotional learning, the teaching of that, um, which is great, right? That was his job. And then all of a sudden in around 2020, things started to change from social emotional learning to transformational or transformative social emotional learning. And so so this idea is he was seeing what he considered a rise in an ideologically driven educational approach to social emotional learning. And so when we talk about things like, well, how can we put into practice celebrating diversity and challenging discrimination and prejudice, but not from that maybe critical social justice lens, but from a more classical social justice lens? Like, how do we do that? What's the difference? And so I think these practices that Jason outlines, and I got to tell you, there's many of them, right? There's a lot of different practices that he outlines. And so we're going to be talking about what those practices are and some of the practices that we engage in that are either similar to what is in the book, exactly what's in the book, or something that aligns closely with what is in the book, because we all have different histories around practicing these kinds of activities, journaling and loving kindness and meditation and things like that. So I'm going to ask Wink to come in now to talk about just your thoughts on part three and yeah, what in particular grabbed you and what kinds of pathways of practice do you incorporate into your life?
Well, thank you, Zander, for that introduction and that great overview. To me, awareness is important. I mean, as Jason talks about in the book, it's a way in which we can be better mindful of where other people are coming from. And in that case, we bring more clarity to how we engage the world. So we're not always engaging or reacting to quote unquote external chaos, but we're having an informed sensitivity, if you will, to the world. Um, how do I engage in the practice of awareness? Um, One of the things Jason talks about in his book as an example of awareness, a practice for awareness would be the intentional, respectful observation. The intentional, respectful observation. And there were three recent examples that come to my mind recently. Now, of course, I could probably, if I had 10 hours, I could give you 50 examples. Because of our limited time, I'll give you three that seem most timely and instructive. So, I happen to have been in Richmond, Virginia, the past few days, which is an area I grew up in. However, it's very different from where I live today, San Diego, California. And so I'm always observant and observe differences just because I'm a curious person. What are the values that I have in terms of the theory, EAT? So anyway, so in my awareness, which I just do as a matter of course, there were three examples where my awareness was manifested in intentional, respectful observation. So number one, we were at a hotel in Chester, Virginia, which is where I grew up, and the town is probably well, the area is probably 35% Black, 40% Black, which is far, far different from where I live in San Diego. San Diego is perhaps 5% Black. My little ecosystem every day is probably 3% Black. So 3% Black versus 35 to 40% Black. So one of the things I noticed as I went into the hotel lobby, there were several gentlemen, probably middle-aged or reaching senior status, and they were wearing the insignia for Omega Psi Phi. Omega Psi Phi, for our listeners, is one of the significant Black fraternities. And Black fraternities are a very important part of Black culture and Black consciousness. I refer listeners to a wonderful book, Our Kind of People, The Black Upper Class by Lawrence Otis Graham, which talks about the importance of Black fraternities in Black culture and consciousness. But in the event, I never joined a Black fraternity. I never had any interest. But however, I would recognize I was in an environment where there were people who were very invested in that as part of their identity. So I didn't go up to them and say, hello, well, I didn't pledge a fraternity. Or why did you pledge the Qs and not Alpha Phi Alpha, which is my son's fraternity? Well, no, no, no. I focused rather on observing their interaction and how they were obviously invested in this particular identity. And I sought to learn, and through my observance, I was aware of my surroundings. So I couldn't just pretend that I was in a place where Black fraternities didn't matter. They matter quite a bit. So that's an example of intentional, respectful observation. I didn't come off like a dork and say, hey, what's going on, Q's? I just observed. Number two, historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs. Now, there are about 40 to 48 historically Black colleges and universities in the country. It so happens that my home county has a Black college, Virginia State University. And Richmond has Virginia Union University. So once again, it's an example where it's a different culture. And I remember we went to a restaurant, my daughter and I was wearing my Stanford sweatshirt over my Yale polo shirt. As we walked into the restaurant, I noticed once again it's about 35 to 40% Black, which is what it should be, which in Virginia. And I noticed this elderly couple at the table across from us. And everyone there, they were wearing very proudly their Virginia State University t shirts, uh, pride in their university. Well, I observed respectfully, and I was mindful that they may or may not jive with the whole Ivy League thing. So I just noticed, observed, smiled. I didn't actively insert myself and say, hey, wonderful school, Virginia State University, because I might have come across as dork like, nerd like, or a little bit strange, particularly given the shirts I was wearing, sweater and polo shirt. So I just observed and watched, and they smiled at me and I smiled at them. But I think that was another example of intentional, respectful observation. I made a note of their apparel and attire, which showed a certain pride and identity and a certain experience, college experience, which was different from mine and that of my family. So that was the second example. Um, and then third, uh, later the following day, I think, my daughter and I strolled through Pocahontas State Park, which is the largest state park in Virginia. Ironically, I had only gone to the state park once or twice when I was a little kid, but I took my daughter there, and she was in heaven. She was in hog heaven, and I just observed it brought like a stack of index cards, like 100 cards cataloging 100 different trees because she loves trees. And she was just in heaven observing the oak and the beech and the hickory trees. He was collecting the acorns and the nuts, trying to assess what they were. Uh, and then and I observed this respectfully. I'm not really a tree person. I like trees, but not that much. But then I made an observation based upon my respectful notice of what she was doing. I think I understand why you love the East Coast so much because there's so many different trees. And that's not the case in San Diego. As she always tells me, there aren't really trees in San Diego. They're just palm trees. They're not trees. There's eucalyptus and there's something else and something else. And that's it. And she looked at me with such love in her heart. And she said, "Wow, you get it. Finally, someone gets it. Why I love the East Coast so much and not San Diego." And I felt in that moment that she felt seen. And she felt seen because I had respectfully and intentionally observed her interaction in the state park in this panoply of different colors, autumn colors. So those are my three examples of awareness practicing, Zander.
That was great. I love all that. It's so true that context matters,
Yes,
right?
yes,
When we are in a different location, when we're in a group of people that are different from us, I mean, that's absolutely the case. In when I think about the your daughter in the trees, and I'm like, oh yeah, as somebody who practically grew up in San Diego, um, yeah,
yeah,
it's the palm tree and the eucalyptus
right,
tree
right, right.
and then all the desert shrub and the cactus. But then you can go just a little north and you can, and you can get the Torrey pine,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
outside of La Jolla. You can go to Joshua Tree and get those really funky trees that they have out there. And I live up in Oregon now, and man, I mean, it's I don't know what you think about her, going off one day, for college or something in the East Coast, but you can just let her know she can just come up north a little bit and get
there
lots
you
of
go.
trees. Or just go to Yosemite, but yeah, I mean that's slightly off the topic, but I just no, I love all of those great personal examples and showing how much context matters. That you didn't, right? We don't, it doesn't always have to be something controversial, right? It doesn't have to be something political or something social. It was,
Right.
you were just observing that there was collegiate pride
Yes.
and, that but you also didn't, at least you didn't communicate to us any assumptions you made about how they might be judging you because
Oh,
you
good point.
are wearing Yale or Stanford. Like that didn't enter into the discussion. I would, if that was something that came up, I think you would have included it. I also didn't hear you making the same judgments, like, oh, they went to such and such, right? So
Right.
you noticed it, um,
Yes.
right? You made note of it, but I didn't
Yes.
hear judgment, which is really beautiful, right?
Oh,
That,
thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's just, I think that's part of my personality. Where they judge, I'm not a mind reader. I can't read minds. And I think we err sometimes when we try to. I think oftentimes in the public square, people presume the worst from actions or behaviors. And I've never tried to do that because you really can't be in someone else's mind. I think I wrote an essay once where I wrote that I had a friend who happens to Jewish from the Ukraine, and that she felt a little bit estranged from the Jewish community. And my heart went out to my friend, but I couldn't really know her feelings. I can only know my feelings hearing her estrangement. And I thought that was kind of the point I was making here as well. You can't read minds. You know your
yes.
feelings, but you can't read someone else's internal feelings.
That's right. And I think oftentimes people think that empathy means feeling other people's feelings, where empathy is recognizing in yourself the potentiality or the experience of having similar feelings,
Mhm.
maybe even about something different,
Yeah,
right?
right.
I think feeling other people's feelings is when people are trying to be sympathetic,
Hmm.
right? Which is not the same thing. I think oh my goodness, I'm forgetting her name. She's a social worker out of Texas, had a TED talk, wrote a bunch
Yeah.
of books.
Oh, I know you're talking about. Her name starts with a
Um,
B, right?
Brene
yes. Oh my,
Brown.
Brown, Braun.
Brene
Yes,
Brown. Yeah.
that's it.
Brene
Yeah.
Brown has this great, one of her talks, one of her TED talks, she was differentiating between empathy and sympathy. And then somebody made a little comic or a cartoon out of it that you can see on YouTube, and it's really funny. It's really funny, but well, and also, this not mind reading. And I'm going to hand it off to Diana because
Yeah.
although we're not going to necessarily go into detail about this one thing, but you mentioned about not reading other people's minds, not really um that's not really any of your concern. I always say like it's none of my business what other people think, but our brain doesn't know the difference between real and perceived
Mm,
in some
that's a good
ways.
point.
So
That's a good
if we
point.
assume somebody's um criticizing us in their mind, and then we can start to feel criticized,
Mm,
and then that sets off a whole system of
mhm.
releasing chemicals in our body and brain that
That's true.
get
That's
us
true.
to start acting as if we're being criticized. I mean, it's so
The neural
bizarre.
pathways go south.
Yeah, right. So it creates that anxiety or the
Yeah.
fight or flight thing, So, but yeah, so Diana, how about yeah, just some of your overall thoughts about part three and any thoughts specifically about this chapter's focus on practice and what practices maybe jumped out at you or how do you apply them?
So, it's so funny that we, mentioned Brene Brown because she's someone who's been actually at top of my mind for a while. I think a lot of her uh, research is about shame, right? And how unhelpful using shame is to drive behavior. And what I think is ironic is when Jason came to this work as social emotional, it's from the social emotional learning space, and you started by asking how did that transformative bit go? The critical piece is actually in my mind using shame, and it's so to me ironic because I've listened to her. I was very fond of her in terms of her actual research on shame, but then to hear her on certain podcasts use shame to drive critical social justice was
Mm,
such a disconnect to me. So I'll step back and say, well, what do I practice? Because this is the hardest part for me. And when I have had, my own one-on-one discussions with Jason and kind of challenging him with this work, because I find, um, like the part about love thy enemy, like in today's world, that's hard. That is hard for me because if someone wants me dead, it's really hard to practice love for that individual. Um, so what do I do? 478 breath work is always where I start. My awareness starts by paying attention to my breath work. And so I find that when I am stressed or being triggered, I hold my breath. And then, that tightness that you feel in your stomach, and then you're almost that. So I have to recognize that to overcome it. And when I recognize it, that allows me to then practice the 478 and actually start breathing again. Because when you're clamped and not breathing, things tend to escalate. So 478, 4 breaths only takes a minute, but kind of helps me recognize, ooh, I'm in a situation right now where I'm getting a little triggered. I don't know why yet, but just recognizing and allowing it helps me do the next step, which often is investigating what's going on. Um, when I feel that overwhelm, I find grounding myself in nature is probably the best relief. I can't think myself out of, angst and overwhelm. I have to like go and look at the waves, right? In the ocean. Like that's why I'm so like jealous of you. One day I want to be next to like the San Diego Ocean because
Come
I
on
I
down, Diana. The water's warm,
and
warmer
I
than the
grew
Bay
up.
Area.
Right, right, right. I grew up by Ocean Beach in San Francisco, like literally
Okay,
4 blocks. And so for me,
right,
and I long for that because when you go there and you see the vastness of the ocean and the
right,
crashing of the waves, you realize,
right.
okay, my problems aren't so big. Like look at,
True.
you know what I mean? And I contrast that with probably my only form of exercise these days is I love to hike in nature. And so
Mm,
when you guys were talking about trees, and I think about my favorite place here is up in Woodside, these huge redwood trees. And you
mm,
again, you feel like a little ant, right? You're looking up and you're
right,
like,
right.
wow. So life, challenges become a little less overwhelming. But so those are my kind of small practices. But I do, and I obviously believe in self-compassion. It's probably how I get through half my days when I screw up, whether it's with my kids or my work. But I do think we live in a society now where kindness is almost, I don't know if it's taken for granted sometimes or
Mm.
over like there is this concept. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Gad Zad's work. He's an evolutionary psychologist, but he talks about suicidal empathy a lot. And I do feel like in our attempt to be kind to everyone,
Mhm.
we risk being cruel to the kind because when you are kind to the cruel,
Sure.
there's like this famous, I even wrote it down as I was going through it. Let me just pull it up. He who is compassionate to the cruel will ultimately become cruel to the compassionate. And I feel like we're kind
Mm.
of there right now where we've overdone it with the kindness with certain things. And that gets back to my, it's hard when I know someone wants me dead to be kind to that person. Right? Like that's really hard right now for me where I'm sitting as a Jew in this country. So not to bring up, world politics, but that's what's landing with me as I went through this. I'm like, God, these practices, I know I need to do them, and yet sometimes it yeah, it's not, it doesn't feel like it's the reality of what we're living through right now.
Diana, if I might, Zander, Diana, here's a hypothetical. It's based upon an essay I read. I think it went viral in some circles. So let's assume you are a gay man, and let's assume you are uh, Jewish. And let's assume you decide to make a friend through one of the online apps. And so let's assume you meet your friend, and your friend happens to be Palestinian, but he doesn't know you're Jewish because you kind of look indeterminate. So let's assume you and your friend have a happy time. And let's assume after a happy time, uh, Palestine comes up. And the Palestinian, you guys are in bed together, and the Palestinian says to you, well, I just can't believe this genocide in Gaza. And the guy recognizes he doesn't know he's Jewish. How would Jason's EHT theory help that Jewish guy work through that kind of intimate issue? Because obviously the Jewish guy doesn't think there's a genocide going on in Gaza, but yet you're in bed together.
Yeah, like I guess we have to start with what's the value, right? Going back
Mhm.
to the basics in step one. So what value do I want to prioritize? Is it my friendship? Is it my own dignity with, you know, the truth?
Should he
And
reveal he's Jewish or not?
um ultimately, of course, because then
Okay,
because if truth is, you know, part is a value,
right,
you have to be authentic, right?
right.
Um, but I think I would start with the curiosity, right? I would
Mm.
start with, well, tell me more
Tell me
about
more. Yeah.
what makes it, how do you define genocide? I want to
Mhm.
understand kind of where you come, because there's so many words being thrown around today that have truly lost their meaning, from Nazi fascists, right, to
Yes,
ethnic
yes.
cleansing, to those, you know, from my ancestry, like those are really words that carry a lot of trauma, but also of history rooted in truth. And I feel like today a lot of that history is just being erased by words that have lost the true meaning. So I would start with curiosity in that. I would also kind of, I may, depending on, the
The
depth of our
situation. Right,
connection,
right.
right? I may say, wow, that landed a little bit harshly, and I'm feeling a little bit triggered right now. And I mean, call it out, right? You got to name that's the part of the recognizing and being aware of what's happening, right? I'm
Hmm.
actually need to take a moment because I want to respond appropriately without triggering you. So I'm going to take a
Right.
breath, right? And I think the more we can out loud say what's happening, the more we normalize that, yeah, there's a lot of big feelings behind what the communication is, what the discussion that's happening. There's a lot of big feelings behind that. But for us to be able to process those feelings so that we can come together to some form of common humanity, we have to
Yeah.
actually call those out, right? Like we have to actually say, okay, I'm feeling whatever it is. And it may be from anger to frustrate, like that there's a whole continuum.
Right, right, right,
And
right.
yeah, and I think some of it is taking it from the extremes of that continuum and bringing it to what that happy medium is for the both of us.
And in the real example, apparently, the Jewish guy said it was one of the most open and honest discussions he had ever had with anyone about the conflict. To me, that's
Hmm.
amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about like, well, this is just a hookup, so they're probably not friends. Um, right? He might never see this person again,
Hmm.
right? In that situation, I probably would have considered the safety factor that you're basically undressed and in the safety factor of that. I think I would have just moved on and been more
Mm.
intentional next time in what kind of information I have in my bio or that I share before hooking up because yeah, I wouldn't want to end up in a situation like that again. That's just the idea of like I'm glad that it worked out, but at the same time, it's um, and this is a value judgment that I'm going to make, but the to so freely give of yourself intimately, I it doesn't compute with me. I don't understand hookup culture at all. And just so to have that kind of intimate experience, even if there's not emotions involved, um, it's it's like, what if it was even worse than that? What if that person was a person who campaigned for Palestine? What if they were somebody who, like, what if
Hamas
it went even,
representative.
yeah, what if they, like, right, which is not unlikely because, there's a lot of on the down low cultures. And I know people who live in the Middle East and
Right.
they're hooking up over there too. So
In Gaza? In Gaza?
well, in other parts of the Middle
Oh, okay, okay,
East.
okay.
Yeah. I don't know about Gaza, but they're definitely so they're living a particular life with a wife and children, and they're part of a particular religion, Islam, and they're doing all those things and they're hooking up. So you know what I mean? Like the safety factor was something that I would um, but that idea of like being truthful and having integrity, it's like, well, then just do that up front. And if that means that it repels certain people, like, well, why would you want to be intimate with somebody who would hold those views anyway? It's
Good
that
point.
psychic exchange, so to speak. But that's my sort of prudish Catholic upbringing
Yeah.
slipping in. Like, why are they doing that?
That's
But I'm trans, of course, and I was a lesbian for many years. I'm not judging,
right, 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 right.
gay culture, but as somebody who came from lesbian culture, um, I can tell you that I and most of the people around me didn't understand what the boys were doing. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? But yeah, so I wanted to take us back to something that Diana said about the recognition, right? Getting to the place of recognizing. And what do we need to recognize? The emotions that are coming up for us, the physical sensations that are coming up for us, the thoughts that are coming up, right? Because these things are just going to emerge, they're going to appear. They are beyond our control in how they show up, when they show up. Um, right, that's just part of the sympathetic nervous system just firing off, and our brain going, oh, let me provide you with a shortcut to what you need to do next. Here's a thought, boom, here's a thought, boom. And so to be able to recognize those things, but oftentimes we can be so distracted by our mind that we're not paying attention to the sensations on our body, the heart rate that's increased, or the perspiration that's begun, or the clenching in our chest, or the unease in our stomach, right? Or we might be so focused on that we're not noticing the right? So it's not that we can necessarily pay attention to all three at once. Maybe that's something that people get to someday with a lot of intention. But I like that you raised that issue of the recognition, because in the work that I do, and I've been doing for the last 5 years in teaching psychoeducation, in group settings, right? Teaching people self-care and self-compassion and emotion regulation and stress management. This is key, that recognition, to pay attention, right? And to do things like progressive muscle relaxation or body scans, or grounding exercises. You mentioned, that as well. When I think about the things that I do, like what are some of the practices that I incorporate into my life? Some of them are things that I picked up really early on when I was much younger. So when I was 12, I might have mentioned this in another episode. When I was 12, my father decided that my birthday present was going to be a mantra from the Transcendental Meditation Ashram And so he took me down to the Hermosa Beach Transcendental Meditation Ashram. I grew up in Torrance, which is part of in Los Angeles, and that was my gift. Here's your mantra. And so I was this really strange 12-year-old that was walking around the playground during recess at school, meditating while all the other kids were on the playground playing on the swing bars or the the monkey bars or whatever, or shooting baskets. So this is something that I was introduced to, and I still meditate. I do it less formally than with a mantra. It's more a mindfulness practice. But I have been to silent retreats. I did a week-long silent retreat called a metta retreat, which is just another way of saying loving kindness. And so that was a silent retreat for a week at Spirit Rock up in Marin County in California. A really beautiful place. And so definitely mindfulness meditation, but then also through my work I've picked up, and there's breathing exercises that go along with all of those things, mindfulness meditation. But I was introduced to a particular kind of breathing exercise when I was a social worker with the US Navy with active duty service members, and that's called box breathing. It's a breathing technique that we used with the SEALs. And so Diana had mentioned a type of breathing technique that she uses. I like the box breathing. It's where you breathe in for to the count of four, you hold your breath to the count of four, you release it to the count of four, and then you hold it again with your lungs empty, at least partially, to the count of four, right? And so there's things that you can find online that show like a ball getting bigger and holding and getting smaller and holding, or a line around the box, right? So that you don't have to count, because sometimes people find that distracting. So breathing exercises, I really love those. Self-compassion comes up a lot in the work that I do, because although I can't relate to this, but people have a really active critical mind. I had encephalitis as a child, so part of my mind just works very differently, or there's parts of my mind that or my brain, I should say, that were impacted by the encephalitis. The whole right side of my brain, actually, I was paralyzed on the left side of my body for about a year, and so I I don't know if it's that or something else, but I don't have a running voice in my mind telling me negative things or criticizing or belaboring things. I don't ruminate. I don't I don't chastise myself. But I teach self-compassion because I know that that's something that comes up a lot for people. And so this is a way of saying, if you want to practice self-compassion, one of the ways to think about how to do it initially is, if you were struggling and you told somebody that you really care for and they care for you, that you were struggling with something, how would they respond, right? They would respond compassionately. And so the idea of self-compassion is to respond to your own self in your struggles in the same way that your friend would respond to you, or you would respond to them if they were struggling, right? Like most people won't criticize or chastise somebody who's struggling. So that's a good way to think about how to do self-compassion. There's some really great resources online, because there's a whole self-compassion like institute. You could take a quiz, and there's books and videos and trainings you can go through. It's a whole field of study. Um,
So you think
yeah.
you don't have an inner critic because of the encephalitis, or because you've trained yourself over time to not, not, I don't want to say not pay attention to the inner critic. I mean, I'm fascinated because I've never met anyone who doesn't have an inner critic. You know what I
Well,
mean?
Yeah.
Diana, you might remember this goes towards my idea that there might be a difference between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere in terms of a sense of wholeness. I shared
Right.
with Diana earlier an example of I think she was a professor or a scientist who suffered a stroke. And I think it just took out the left side of her hemisphere. And she recalled how she felt so much at one, sense of wholeness with the universe. And so that left hemisphere just wasn't there anymore. And that sounds like kind of what Zander, how he lives. That sounds
Yeah,
like his way of being.
yeah. I think it's stroke of genius.
No pun intended.
I think, yeah. She wrote a book, but she did a TED Talk. I reached out to
Yes,
her.
I know
I
yeah,
reached out to her after the TED Talk and said I had encephalitis and I am so present focused.
yeah, yeah.
I have to pull myself out of the present to think about something from the past,
Interesting.
or plan. I also I don't have visions. I don't visualize. Um, so it's interesting, and I know this is also not something that's very common to not visualize thoughts. So when it's like when people are like, we're going to do a guided meditation, and you're at the beach or you're in the mountains, and I'm sort of like, oh, okay, like I can do it in a different way, but I don't see the mountains or the ocean. And I don't know if
Interesting.
that's the encephalitis. But I do. I live with a constant sense of awe and wonder. And I mean, we've been living in our brand new apartment for over a month now, and I don't think a day has gone by that I haven't said to my wife, we live here. Look at this beautiful house. Look at our beautiful view. It's every day is like a new day. And I'm very childlike in that way, and that could be the encephalitis. I don't really care. I just love it.
I mean, I think that's what we all strive to. I mean, that is, I would love to get to that. And I think at one of Wink and I had a talk in between these recordings, and I mentioned about this book that when I was in college, I was contemplating writing. So Xander is a level 4, where you just, you know, you can appreciate life and all the complexity and not let it, you know, uh, take a toll on you,
Hmm.
is what I'm
Yeah,
sensing.
I
So
think
that's
I think I
amazing.
used to. It's like I think I used to be more. So that maybe it is a kind of a combination of things. Because I think I used to be more reactionary when I was younger, and it was explained to me that that was because my brain was still recovering from such a traumatic,
Mm,
right? Because it took me a couple of years to be able to walk again
mhm.
and and to talk correctly. Like it really did mess up a lot of things in my life. So it's so that they thought that reactiveness was as a result of that. But it's like, who knows? They tracked me into special ed and things like that because I had these behavioral problems. Um, but then it was like, oh, maybe it's the hyperactivity or what we call ADHD now. And it's like, well, am I actually ADHD, or is that just another symptom of the residual effect of the encephalitis? I mean, who knows? But yeah, it boggles people's minds. They're like, what do you mean you're not in terror of what's going on right now in the United States? And I'm like, what's going on? What do you mean? Like, I'm just like, they're like this, and this. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, things come and go. It's like the tide. It's it's like, and these are things I teach. So it's, who knows, right? It's like constant reinforcement helps probably too.
But it also speaks to the amazing, neuroplasticity of the
Mm,
brain, and that you can overcome deficits and trauma and all of that
mm,
through
mm,
things like practice. But I keep going back to, all of this work is about improving the individual. And the idea is that if you can improve the individual, then that individual can improve relationships with,
Yeah.
their community, and then hopefully the communities can heal. But it doesn't start the other way around. You can't start with the collective and then assume that that's going to trickle down to the individual. I really believe this work starts with the individual, and that's where that transformative SCL bit just went completely off the rail. And that's the issue that we're dealing with today in our schools is, we are forcing kids first to see immutable characteristics, group people based on them, and literally deny dignity and someone's value. Like
Right.
we're literally doing the opposite of all of this teaching. And so I guess my question is, how do these practices, how do we get back to the original intent of this work and not the bastardization of what it's
Yeah.
become?
Mhm.
Yeah. And Diana, I'm going to just offer a counter argument or push back a little bit. Not that I don't agree with you, I certainly do. But some might say, well, Diana, problem is this way of being in the world, this way of perceiving the world, this perspective taking, that it's inherently a factor of one's unique personality or one's unique brain experience, or Zander, and that the problem is it's not something that can be taught because people may have a set point in how they're in their neural pathways. And maybe their set points are more collective from the top down as opposed to the bottom up. How would you respond to that possible critique?
Oh, I don't disagree. I mean, I think
Okay.
we are all wired differently. Like I think my two kids, they were in the same type of, but actually they were not in the same womb. Like they are very differently wired, and I can bring that back to what was going on in my life. And I think this is where epigenetics comes in, right?
Okay.
Um, to not overshare, but so apologies for those where this is TMI. I had five miscarriages, right? And so when I was pregnant with my older daughter, I didn't know if she was going to survive or what, like, so there was a lot of cortisol, like stress hormone during
Hmm.
the 9 months. I was also on bed rest with her. So again, it was a very
Yeah.
and I think about how she is in this world and I love her to death, but a little bit high strung and anxious. And, um, you know, I think slowly letting the world not overwhelm her as she gets
Hmm.
older. But versus my other one where now I had already one, delivery where I was like, and I know I remember that pregnancy. I was just a little bit more low key and and she is more low, I mean, is it all I'm just trying to explain away their personalities?
Sure.
Maybe there's a part of that, but the point is I think there's more to how individuals get wired and how they present than what we see today in their lived experience, right? I think
Mm.
our ancestral our lineage, like I think all of that does play a role,
Yeah.
but we also have a choice, right? And I think this is what it comes down to with this practice, right? It's all about between stimulus and response, right? Creating that space where we can choose. And that is where I think A, the magic is, but B is you had asked like top down versus bottom up. At the end of the day, creating that choice is always going to be bottom up, right? Like
Hmm.
so even if you're a hostage in Gaza or you still can choose how you react in that moment.
Viktor
um
Frankl, man, search for meaning. Exactly. Exactly.
so but I think a lot of us don't appreciate, like and myself included. I mean, there's plenty of instances where I catch myself reacting, like sometimes I'll even see myself reacting, be upset with myself for reacting and not being able to stop it. This happened
That's
at a
so
school
funny.
board meeting where I'm
That's
like,
so funny.
I can't. It's just, I flipped the
Yeah.
lid. And so that's where the grace comes in. So my last thing I forgot to say is when I do screw up, when that inner critic is like, can you believe, that's where I'm like, okay, hand on the heart. And Jason
Sure.
actually says this, right? Because then you can feel that heart racing and then
Yeah.
slowly letting yourself get bringing the thinking brain back in. So,
Sure.
but I to this day mess up.
It does make sense to me, Wayne, that, you know, depending on the culture that we're raised in, wherever we are in the world, there are more individualistic and more collective societies,
Mm,
right? And so as we're growing up in those societies when we're very, very young, right, that's where a lot of those neural pathways, they're going to be, you know,
right.
getting hooked up based on those kinds of things that we're seeing and we're experiencing. And so it's like I can see how there's the pros and cons to um, being a highly collectivist oriented society, right? There's the wonderful pros that come with that, the connectedness, the sharedness, the all the commonalities and the values, and so much is going to come from that. And the individuality that can get lost is going to impact each member of that collective body differently. Some people are going to sort of be like, well, okay. And other people are going to really, really struggle and push up against it. And then there's the
Mm,
opposite, right? More individualistic societies and their desire for that more collectiveness. And so they get involved in, really collectivist oriented groups and religions, right? Because they want that. So it's interesting um, to think about how, you know, where we begin and then where we end up and how it impacts us. And I remember I was probably a teenager when I had a conversation with my father about like what's the point of going off into the hills or the forests or into the ashram to meditate all by yourself when there's all these things going on in the world. And I had learned about Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk who decided to come out of wherever he was and go into the streets, right? That engaged Buddhism and doing walking meditations in the area where there was war going on, right, during Vietnam War. And my father said that, that starting with the self, as Thich Nhat Hanh did, was had the capability of radiating outwardly, even if you never left the cave or the hill or the right, that people knew you were doing it, and it resonated something within them in the village, and then that resonated something maybe in their household, which then resonated into the family, which then took it out. It was sort of
mhm.
like, so it's like, well, engaged Buddhism, not engaged, where do you start? It's typically in the individual, right? But yeah, really wonderful stuff. It's like, can we cultivate resiliency um in a collective environment, or only individualistic, or both, or like
And
it's
and that's a
right.
great question. And I think it depends upon the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because every
Mm-hmm.
person has a particular neural pathway makeup. So every person's going to react to that differently, which is
Yeah.
great, which is fun, which is good. I mean, to me, that's part of human dignity. Every person has the dignity to accept themselves as they accept themselves and to perceive the world as they perceive the world. I think we get into a problem when we impose externally a good and a bad way of self perception and accept perception of the outside. So, case in point, I don't know why, I don't know how, I don't know when, but I really don't live my life with a black consciousness switch turned on. Diana and I will talk about this later, probably. But I really navigate the world as the same me, whether I be in Big Sur, which I love, the hermit monastery up there, or San Diego, Coronado, or Washington, D.C., or Richmond, Virginia. I'm always the same me. Sometimes I turn the Black consciousness switch on because either others have raised it into my awareness, or I'm just curious about noticing differences. But I think that that is uncommon, Xander. I think
Mm,
many people do have their Black consciousness switch always turned on. And for me, that has been an interesting source, an interesting observation, if you will, about reality. And I don't know how that happens. How is it that a guy born in the segregationist South, who attended all Black schools in first and second grade because of segregation, who weathered the desegregation struggles of the New South, and attended the University of Virginia and Harvard Law School and lived across the country. How is it that my Black consciousness, which quote unquote, just seems off as a default position? And I think because it's
mm,
off, I'm far more open to new experiences, right? Like the very fact I can raise this question, I think is a sign that it's turned off. Because there are some people who would not be able to raise these questions. They would not be able to
mm.
examine their life with the same deep introspection and self-examination. What are your thoughts on that, Xander?
Yeah, I immediately resonate with that because although I haven't articulated it, because I'm an external processor, so I need to kind of be engaging to get to it. I'm like, oh, maybe that's it now that you've mentioned it, which is, I think, um, I do have a bit of maybe not turned offness, but a very, low tuned or
Low
low
tuned.
volumed, right?
I
Low
like that.
volume of like trans awareness, or even prior to that, like, lesbian or gay and lesbian awareness. Um, because I don't know, for me, it's like I'm a fish and I'm in the water and I don't pay attention to the water necessarily,
Oh, that's deep. That's deep. That's deep.
right?
A little bit of David Foster Wallace.
Right. Yeah, there's, and this has become much more apparent to me more recently because I've been in some virtual spaces with exclusively trans people, in particular trans men like myself. And I will find, and there's, 30, 40 of us. It's not just two or five of us, right? It's a
Yeah,
large group, so to speak, online. And it it seems as if there's no way to truly know this, but it seems as if based on the gesturing, like people nodding, the comments in the chat, that I'm having a very different experience and response to what's going on in our country right now, and what other people are thinking, we should all do and how we're all experiencing, using language like, well, I know we're all blankety blank, and it's clear to me
right,
that we're all blah blah blah,
right,
and
right.
I did something the other day. It wasn't consciously, it was just my, I respond, I'm kind of, I respond, and not in micro gesturing. Like I'm just sort of like and so I sort of shook my head no, because I was for myself. I wasn't saying you're wrong. I was saying, oh, that doesn't, I don't relate to that, or that doesn't apply to me. But the other person who was talking saw me doing that and got very mad and said,
Yes.
yes, yes, it is. And I was like, oh, I went, oh. And then because I realized, they were like, I see you nodding your head. And I was like, oh, like it was that me, and then I was like, then I just put in the chat, I was like, oh, I'm not, I'm just, that was my way of saying, that's not true for me. Um,
But,
but
but see, that person should respect your human dignity to accept
Yes.
your self definition, right? To me, that's like
Yes.
core of human existence. You don't have
Yes.
the right to impose upon someone else they exist.
Well,
I
but
don't know.
we do know that with an in-group, out-group,
Yes,
right? Within that, that sort of
right.
the distortion, that cognitive distortion is that we are actually much more critical of and demonstrate our displeasure with those of us that we expect to be or assume to be in our in group when they express things that don't align with what we think is the in group thing to think or believe or behave. And
Mhm,
so it was immediate. That person was angry. They challenged me. And,
mhm,
I basically was like, oh, that was my
sure.
internal reaction. And then people were like kind of survivor islanding and they were like, I'm with you, brother, meaning the other person. And nobody, not even DM'd me like, oh, I agree, or, sorry that guy got so angry at you. Nothing. I was just but I just sort
Did
of
you
let it.
feel supremely offended, Sander?
uh, Well, I just no, I was just like, oh, I need to pay more attention to my nonverbals.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Because I did right because it was so that at least I'm aware of it. So then when somebody says I see you nodding your head, I'm just sort of like, oh yeah, that's me, But it was just in the moment while he was
Yeah,
talking,
right, right.
but I already know that I'm out of step with my in group. I already know that.
But that's
Um,
okay. That, in fact, that makes you more
well,
human. That makes you more, I think.
Well, it's
Well,
one of the things, it's actually one of the not the reason, but it's part of the reason why I stay engaged with my community because
Mhm,
I know there are other people that are out of step and
right,
and I'm willing to be the only one until somebody else shows up.
hmm,
I'm strong enough for that. I can do that.
right, right.
Yeah.
same. I
Diana?
would argue we all three of us here are. But that brings me to a question about this new push for, quote, belonging in our schools, which for me is code for
Mm.
conformity, right?
Hmm.
Well, in our
And
workplaces too, Diana, it's also a workplace thing, belonging. Yeah.
right. But
Yeah.
is that really what we want? Because belonging,
Mm.
when you have to
Yeah,
sacrifice your
Yeah.
own individual dignity, right? And
Yeah.
right.
and for me, why
Conform.
exactly. And so this is that disconnect. Of course, we all want to feel like we belong, but it's actually okay to be unique. It's okay to, right? For me, why do I care about? Because I care about the brain, right? And our next generation, their brains are developing. So as we keep talking about with this book, it's how we what we practice, how things get wired. I don't want all kids to learn like little robots, right? Like this is what you
Right,
need to do
right.
to be a good member of society. That's for
1984.
right, exactly. They need to you need to cultivate that for yourself, and hopefully we all end up close to the same place. I wouldn't want everyone to be in the same place, but with, the values that part one talked about and all of that. But we're literally going away from that. Like by trying to push onto um the next generation concepts that, yeah, they sound good, these are nice words, everything,
Yeah,
but in practice you don't force that, you know.
Mm.
And I think like when what you discussed about Black consciousness, because that raised, I'm like, I don't even know what Jewish consciousness is. Like
we
I
gotta talk, Diana. We gotta talk.
but and I will say that also as a woman, right? Like I think
Mm.
I don't enter a space and my womanism or whatever is like a big part of my identity, even though I'm sure it is. Like there definitely I
Okay,
can
I'm gonna play
reflect on.
devil's advocate, Diana.
Okay.
Let's suppose, as opposed to you being one woman out of three panelists, you were one woman out of three female panelists. Would your consciousness be different or not? If I were a woman and Xander were a woman, would your consciousness as a woman be different on this panel, as opposed to what it currently is?
I don't I don't think so, because being a woman for me is not it's like in the hundred things that I might want to
Gotcha.
say
Right.
my
Right.
identity.
Right.
Being a
Right.
woman, like a mom, yes. Being a mother, being a physician, those are way more up there
Gotcha.
than being a woman.
Mm.
Because what is that? Like again, what is that conscious? I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody might
Um,
say like a feminist consciousness, right? That might be a type of consciousness that
and
a woman could have or something. Yeah.
I think 100 years ago, when there was very clear inequality, I can see how women, you know, that was a huge part of their identity. And I would imagine that Black consciousness comes from, but this is, I would argue, Xander, this is more of what makes you live in the present, right? You have to context,
Oh,
right? Like in
right. Right.
today's world,
Right.
women
It's a lot better.
yeah, and I'm like, I'm grateful for that. I
Mm.
practice gratitude for I don't have to worry. And so it
Yeah.
bothers me, and where my roadblock is that I'm as an individual working on is I have trouble with women who today are still dwelling in the past. As if the world is like that, but we're not. We're living in today's world where you have
Right.
more
Right.
opportunities than the white man. I mean,
Right.
that's the reality today, right? So I
Mm.
think there's a disconnect. I think there's a disconnect from the trauma of the past, that there were very clear inequalities, but where we are today, we have to appreciate all where we've come. So yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense, but yeah, women. And even the Jewishness, right? Like, I feel like my Jewish consciousness, if you want to call it that, is being forced upon me, like in the last few
Interesting.
years.
From
It's just
what
not something
from what sources? From the media, from your peers, from the synagogue, from colleges?
all,
Where's it coming from?
yeah, all of the above. Ever since we have been fixated on identity. I mean, this is
Mm,
my biggest issue, is why are we fixating on tribal identities by
yeah,
immutable characteristic? Like,
yeah,
I just want to get to
Mm.
know you as Wink and you as Zan, and
yeah.
that's how we met. And look at us, like. But if someone wanted to label our identity, we should never be talking, right? Like, what,
Mhm.
the three of us having a conversation, what do we have in common, right? And yet, look at all the richness that comes out of not, labeling each other.
Right. That's a
Yeah.
great point. So, in other words, Diana, if we were each purely and only avatars for our group, I was only an avatar for Black Americans, Xander only an avatar for trans community, you only an avatar for Jewish women, this would be a poor, impoverished conversation, right? Because we'd each have to stay in our lane. We couldn't draw upon the wealth, the deepness of our human experience. We couldn't just speak the truth first and foremost over ideology. So I think your point's well taken, is that conversations are richer and more authentic and genuine when we speak from the me, from the I that is the human. When we can only be seen as avatars for a group, then you lose that richness of human experience. We just become talking points. We become sloganeers. We become dogmateers. We become just blackness is oppression. Nothing else matters. That's the E calculation. Everything else flows from that. And the same for Xander. The same for you. So we've broken through in a sense, haven't we, Diana? I think.
Right. So how do we um grow this? Like, how that's my
Yeah.
question. This is what I want to ask
I
Jason,
think people are afraid to break through. Well, I think they're afraid because there's comfort in belonging. There's comfort in the group, in the herd. I think there's a visceral, primal fear of being isolated. You don't want to be the only black guy, quote unquote, not invited to the quote unquote cookout, or you don't want to be the trans person, the lone trans person who dares to speak his mind in a virtual conversation, or you don't want to be the only Jewish woman whose Jewish credentials are suspect in the Jewish community. So I think that's a big part of it, is that there's a fear of being alone, or we don't have the courage to view solitude as a virtue as opposed to something to be feared. That's what I think.
There's something that I heard recently that I think is a contributing factor as well in this is I believe it was a an interview I was listening to recently with Coleman Hughes with Thomas
Yes.
Chatterton Williams, and it was this idea that even though things um are progressing, right? And he was talking about race relations with Obama becoming the first Black president and how that was supposed to be this, it was going to have this great effect on our culture, on our nation, and how that didn't seem to play out. And I think Coleman was curious about it. And Thomas said something along the lines of, as things get better, the things that are not getting better, which are smaller kinds of things, or they're anecdotal things. It's like maybe a
Yeah.
terrible thing that happened to the person there or the person there. It's not happening at such a large scale that that becomes the focus. Like, see, things are still as bad as they always were. You know, white people are still as racist as they've always been because, Henry Louis Gates was arrested by the police officer, trying to break into his own home. Right. So or Trayvon Martin, right? Those are the examples he gave. It's like, see, it's all still terrible. And that he believed that in my paraphrasing, kind of undid this idea that maybe we had gone beyond
Mm,
being a racist, country, or we were in post-racial, that
right.
we weren't actually there. And so it's like the things are so much better for LGBT people in this country. But every little possible slight or mishap or potential threat to that status quo brings up all this anxiety and anger, and people respond to it. Um, and then also, talking about, what's going on, for women, for Jewish people. And one of the things that we don't have any time at all to talk about, and maybe it's completely off topic, but something that does come into my mind quite often these days is there are plenty of things going on around the world that are terrible towards LGBT people, towards Jewish people, towards Christians who are Black, like in Nigeria, like slavery, human trafficking. If we want to if we want to apply a feminist or an LGBT or a Black consciousness lens, where there are plenty of places around the world where we can take that and we can apply it and work with people that are living in those societies to figure out what is their way, right? Not be prescriptive, but to find out what is their way of making change, because we have it really good here for the most part, even though there's always going to be incidents where individuals or small groups of people are still going to have bad experiences. And so I'm not really, maybe they need some more empowered humanity theory in their life,
Yeah. Right,
right?
right,
Because
right.
it's easier to
Mm,
focus, right? Like some people focus really narrowly inwardly, and other people focus really broadly outwardly. And
mm,
so we do seem to be more in a time of focusing inwardly, narrowly in our country here, right? Every tiny, like the microaggression, right? The microaggression is that really narrow inner, which is what the transformative SEL did, was pay attention to the microaggressions, not how to be more resilient in a society that's not going to capitulate and adjust itself to your every little whim and desire and expectation. I don't know about you, but I grew up hearing from all the adults in my life, life's not fair.
Yes, I remember that.
Absolutely. And life's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. Just like I said, and I still flip out, right? Like, of course, there's going to be those exceptions to the rule, but why not
Yeah,
celebrate that the rule has gotten better, right? And there's places in this world where the rule is just as bad, if not going backwards. And here we are, instead of uplifting, all the progress we've made, we're actually I feel through our like when you look at a microscope and just fixating on all the negatives, we erase all the progress that we've
Mhm.
actually made.
yeah.
And
Well, and
that's
we
the
have a
biggest,
large,
yeah.
sorry,
No, no, no,
we have a
that's all.
large population in our country that didn't live through the prior times,
Yeah.
whatever
They're,
those different
and
civil
they're
rights
not even
movements and
being taught
struggles are.
about them.
They're not.
They're
That's
not
right.
I
being,
mean,
that's the
I
part
mean,
that,
everyone under the age of 25 never lived in the previous century. So they have no firsthand knowledge of the things that they bang on about. Slavery, nope. White supremacy as codified in laws and regulations, nope. Uh, Redlining in housing, nope. So I think part of it is almost and maybe part of it is, here's an idea. Could be that everyone has an identity given current educational policies. And so for some groups, teachers give them an identity rooted in the horrible past, and it's not rooted in the current reality. So
Mm,
once again, if you're under the age of 25, life is pretty good compared to your parents and grandparents. But is that ever taught in schools, I wonder? That that kind of a positive spin on
yeah,
our past.
yeah. Probably not broadly enough.
no, because that's considered the colonizer dominant narrative in our schools. I mean, that is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
problem, right? Like, and this is, I think this is how we all found each other is, the pandemic hit, and then all of a
right.
sudden you're like, wait, what is happening here? Like my eyes were open in a way that I couldn't unsee. Yeah, it's they're not being taught. That's the part, like, when what keeps me up at night, why I can't sleep.
Mm,
It's
right,
that
right.
it's that we're rewriting history. We're fixating, that is what counter narrative is, well, let me give you a different perspective. And now this is the new truth, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah.
that's where I'm going to challenge at our next, our final visit
Right,
with
right, right.
Jason is
Yes.
where the limitations of this work, which I believe in and supported and want to uplift it, obviously, but that's where the limit, because at the end of the day, we are individuals doing the work, yet society has a different trajectory
Yeah,
right now.
absolutely. Right. And this has been a really fruitful conversation. We've talked about so many different things. And yeah, I'm also really looking forward to our conversation. So our fourth panel discussion will be with Jason Littlefield. So Jason is going to join us next time. So definitely check that out next. And yeah, look forward to reading your comments and hearing your perspectives on the empowered humanity theory. Anything you want to say, Wink, to close us out? Diana, any final words?
Well, I think this is great work that Jason has done. I think that it's important as a counter, a corrective to an excess of, I think there's an excess of narrative in the classroom, there's an excess of compassion in the classroom, there's an excess of dogma, slogan words. More importantly, I think there's an excess of conformity. You put all those things together, and it's almost the opposite of pro-humanism. We really want to try to be more pro-human in how we raise up the next generation. Because otherwise, we're looking at 1984 and the good old 1960s in Prague, and those weren't so good days. So that's all I have to say.
I concur. I'm looking forward to our next conversation and hopefully many more after that.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
And thank you for listening, everybody.